we actually had a couple questions on this same topic about traditional Catholics attending non-Catholic or Novus Ordo wedding ceremonies and some of the rules that apply to that. So this first viewer asks, is it okay for us to attend my sister's wedding? She says the wedding will be a solemn high mass, but it will be done by Novus Ordo priests in a Novus Ordo church. If it is all right, should we still refrain from receiving communion? May we just be present, but not participating in the Mass? What would your answer to that one be, Father?
The answer, no and yes. They should not receive, and they should not actually be there to worship, merely as a courtesy to the family member who's getting married. But they should not actually take part in the active part in the ceremony. We don't regard the Novus Ordo as being the Catholic religion any more than we regard modernism as being the Catholic faith, right? So, no, if they were to go, they'd go simply as a courtesy, and it would be very obvious, I think, that they're there as a courtesy.
Okay.
So, in any case, that's as far as I.
Okay. Well, that's a Novus Ordo wedding, but what about a Protestant or any other non-Catholic wedding?
Again, one could go to a. In the past, the Church has given permission. Usually, it would be done only with the permission of the local ordinary, which nowadays it's essentially impossible. They'd laugh in your face if you asked for permission to attend one of these. They'd say, "Well, of course, but go to the traditional Mass." Now, that might be a problem. Okay, but go to a Methodist or a Presbyterian service, well, why are you asking? That's perfectly fine. Yeah. But it is always understood that, your presence there is a courtesy to the loved one, and as long as it's valid, as long as it's a valid marriage. If it's not a valid marriage, you couldn't go to the ceremony, you couldn't even go to the reception.
How much of an obligation does one have to ensure that it's a valid marriage?
There would be a grave obligation to ensure that there's nothing that would render it invalid. I mean, if I had a Protestant, well, let me put it this way. If, let's take, they usually, in these cases, casus conscientiae, in the cases of conscience, they use Titus and Bertha. Okay? Let's say Titus has a cousin, Hermione, who is a Protestant. She was raised Protestant. She was actually, from the get-go, she was baptized Protestant. So she's never been a member of the Catholic Church. And she's marrying in a Protestant church, let's say the Lutheran church to another Protestant. Well, it would not be invalid because she was a baptized Catholic, and she couldn't validly marry that way, okay? Because ordinarily, Catholics, if someone is baptized Catholic and tries to get married by a Protestant minister, they'd not only be entering an invalid marriage, they'd be excommunicated for that. If they tried to get married before a justice of the peace, they couldn't be validly married, but they wouldn't necessarily be excommunicated because they're not partaking in a false religion. But in this case, Hermione was never Catholic to begin with, and so she's marrying a Protestant. Now, the Church, in the decree Temesi under Leo XIII, gave permission for such marriages to be valid, that the Church would recognize them as such. But you'd have to see if the man she's marrying was married before. Or maybe he's a baptized Catholic. And so he couldn't marry her validly in a Protestant church. If he's married before and had a wife already and they obtained an annulment, divorce, then of course Hermione couldn't marry him, right? If he has a living wife. So there are a number of reasons why the marriage would be invalid from the get-go that might not be readily apparent. And so a Catholic who, would have to clear these hurdles, as it were, to make sure that he or she was not taking part in something that was either just an act of public fornication and possibly even public adultery. Very grave matter here. So, yes, and also grave scandal for being present at that. So they have an obligation for due diligence to find out, well, is this going to be a valid marriage? Can I even attend the ceremony anywhere? And, if it's not, if there's question about it being valid, I can't even go to the reception. I can't celebrate it.
And does all of the same line of reasoning apply to being a bridesmaid or a groomsman at these weddings, or is there something
Well,
more strict rules for that?
There are rules that would permit that. Personally, I don't see how one could take part in, let's say, even a valid Protestant marriage ceremony as a bridesmaid or a maid of honor, or maid of honor or a groomsman or a best man, even as a witness, without somehow taking part in the religious ceremony. You know what I mean? I mean, I don't see how that is possible. Insofar as they take any active part in the ceremony, that would be communicatio in sacris. That's absolutely forbidden. It would be a mortal sin. To be there passively as an observer is something very different. Okay. If one goes to, let's say, a church that is not traditional Catholic, and stands and sits with the congregation and turns to the page in the hymnal and all the rest, I mean, they're taking an active part in this. At least they're going through the motions anyway. That's not right.
Okay.
I'd say if they have legitimate reason for being there, they should just kneel and pray the rosary for the whole for the whole ceremony.
Okay. All right. That's great. Well, I think that answers a lot of questions. So thank you for that.